Welcome back to 30 Days of Lightroom. I'm JT, and this video is going to focus on lens corrections. Now, depending on how familiar you are with photography, you'll know that the wider the lens you use, typically you'll get some distortions in your image. So for example, let's take a look at some of these wider images. You can start to see some of our straight lines start to bow as they go towards the middle. Again, same thing with some of our other wide angle images here. You'll see some interesting effects going on with those wider shots, and you'll notice that all of your straight lines are no longer parallel. So that is just something that happens with wide angle lenses, and these are some images that I shot in Denver on a rainy, snowy night, and I just want to show you guys what I do for YouTube. I go out and I freeze my tail off sometimes to make these videos, so thank you for watching. Let's start to talk about Lightroom's Lens Correction tab. Let's find a slightly better looking image. Here we go. And you can see I have already made some lens corrections to this image. If we click our little on-off switch, you can see on and off. And you can see some of the controls here allow you to really do some refined lens correction. And we can use automatic, and we can also do some of this manually. So let's first take a look at our profile option here, and then we will do some manual edits to our image. So the first button I almost always have clicked is remove chromatic aberration. Now, almost every lens suffers from a tiny bit of chromatic aberration, especially older zoom lenses and cheaper lenses. So if you're working with a really cheap kit lens, it probably has some chromatic aberration, and you'll typically find that near the edge of contrasty parts of your image, especially towards the corners. Again, I almost always just leave that checked, and Lightroom will do its best to remove any chromatic aberration. There's nothing that leaving this checked is really going to do to hurt your image, so again, I just always have that checked. Now, our next little checkbox here is Enable Profile Corrections. Let's unclick that, and you can see we can select a lens. For example, I was shooting on a Nikon 28mm 1.8. I have a whole list here of lenses that I can select and the profile that Adobe has built for that lens. So that is the automatic lens correction that Adobe has built for this lens. And I can go in and let's say, for example, Adobe's profile wasn't doing enough of an adjustment for me. I can adjust the vignetting and I can adjust the distortion on this image. And I'll typically come in here and make some little edits to Adobe's built-in profile. So again, if we turn that off and on, it's very subtle, but I do think it makes a difference. Again, this was shot with a 28mm, fairly wide lens, but as you get even wider than that, say 14mm, 12mm, 10mm, you'll start to really see some distortion. So let's take a look at a much wider image. And this photo was shot with, I believe, yes, a 14:2.8. So you can see there's a lot more distortion. So let's go ahead. We have removed chromatic aberration checked. Let's check our built-in profile corrections. And you'll see nothing happened yet because I have not selected a lens. This was a Nikon. And what's really cool is typically when you select the make of your lens, it will go ahead and autofill the rest, the model and the profile for you based on your metadata. So in that last image, I said I come in here and I'll make minor tweaks. In this particular image, this is a little bit too much vignette removal. I'll bring that down a little bit, just too bright for my taste. And then I'll also do the same with distortion. As you can see, pay attention to these lines here that should be parallel. That's just a little too much distortion removal. You can see we can do a lot of debulging from our image from what the lens does, but I actually like kind of the look of this 14mm lens, so I typically leave this one alone. Let's again turn this off and turn it back on. I really like the way that correction looks. That looks pretty good to me. Let's take a look at the before. This is completely unedited. And this is kind of my neon edit that I applied to this image. So I think that looks pretty good. And again, we can check this on and off. I really like those profile corrections. And as I said before, the wider you shoot, for example, this is a 14mm lens, you will start to see more distortion than you would, for example, with a 28mm lens or a 50mm lens or a 200mm lens. So let's go back to our wide shot of the building and let's start talking about this little manual section right here. Now I can manually go ahead and really emphasize or correct this distortion. And if you watched our transform video, you'll know all about the constrain crop tool, so that no matter how wide or how much debulging I do with this image, it will automatically crop in. This is way too much for my taste, so I'm going to turn this off and I'm going to reset my distortion. But you can see the power that this distortion slider has to fix those super wide angle images. Let's go ahead and reset that. Another option we have is Defringe right here. You can see kind of some fringing and some abrasion going on here and some artifacting with the edge of these little light bouquet things on my lens. This was actually water droplets on my lens, creating this kind of cool effect from the rain. And I can essentially affect that, pay attention to the edges here, and get rid of some of that defringing. Now this really comes down to trial and error. There we go. You can see by adjusting the amount and the hue in my purple, I got rid of that kind of purple defringing. I'm not really seeing any green fringes here, so messing with my green slider, it does a little bit, but not too much. Now something you want to pay attention to, you can see with these red car tail lights and these bus lights. Let's turn this on and off real quick. We lost some of those reds, just a tiny bit. We lost some of that saturation from our defringing. So be careful with the defringe tool. You can also select the color manually with this color picker tool. Let's go ahead and we'll reset all of this. And I'm going to select this kind of orangey red here. Let's try up here. There we go, got the purple. Sometimes it takes a couple tries. That looks good. But again, I am losing these tail lights, which I think is really important to the contrasting red and blue hues of this image. So be careful with that. I'm going to reset by double clicking. That looks good. And again, I have more manual control over my vignetting as well. You can see it's really heavy on the top and the bottom, and I can decide how far I want this midpoint to come into my image and how much of this image I want affected or corrected with the vignetting. Again, this option is really not to add vignette to your image. It's meant to take away and correct the vignette that was caused by your lens. We're doing lens corrections. If you want to add vignette to your image, remember we have this effects tab and we have an entire video about the effects tab. So let's take a quick look at the before and the after. I like the way that turned out. We got rid of some of that dark vignetting around the edges and we straightened up some of these parallel lines just a touch. So that is the Lens Corrections tab in Adobe Lightroom Classic. I really recommend going in here, playing with the sliders, and getting used to using this tab. There are a lot of powerful and useful tools here that can really take your photography to the next level and make your images look a lot more professional. So that is all for this image. If you learned something, be sure to hit that like button. Don't forget to subscribe for more photography tips, tricks, and hacks. And until next time, get out and go shoot.